Thank you very much, Edith, and thanks everyone for hosting this event. And every time we do this event, I'm always thrilled to be here. It's my intellectual home. Where I work at Fort Leavenworth, they've designated their moniker the intellectual center of the Army. But every day, it's an ongoing debate in my mind whether that's true. But it's not true about here. It's always, intellectually for me, coming home is when I'm back here. So I appreciate it on a personal level. The topic today, as it fits into our larger study or question that we're examining on post-Cold War identities, I think is very pertinent, and I'm going to define pertinent for you right now. I get on a plane on Saturday, and barring whatever Hurricane Irene throws my way, make my way eventually to Central Asia, to Kyrgyzstan and Bishkek, where there's an annual conference hosted by the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. It involves some of the best academics, thinkers, policy analysts, NGO heads, and a variety of others, not just from Central Asian countries, but from all over the world. And they'll discuss broadly security in Central Asia. And I've been going to this conference for a couple of years. Whenever I was there, because of my background from the Department of Defense in the U.S. military and with service in Central Asia, I've worked in embassies there over different tours and different years. I'm always the one thrust into the middle of the topic when it turns to, well, what is the U.S.'s real intention in Central Asia? Or what are you really doing? We know what, we don't believe anything you're going to say, but so we want you just to cut to the chase and tell us what you're really doing here, okay? Because what we think it is, and I'm getting this from Westerners, the Central Asians, certainly the Russians and the Chinese, anybody that's there, is that there is this great game, and they use that term, Bolshoi-Igra. They say that. There are the great games going on in the U.S. You're following in the footsteps of Great Britain. There's something you want out here, and your influences and manipulations are the forefront of your foreign policy. Now, how would you care to address that, Colonel Wilhelm? So then I get up, and I have over time been stumbling through the answer, which is, wow, it's not like that at all. It doesn't seem like that to me. And what I owe everybody is sort of the answer on how the real answer is. So therefore, this topic today is what I more or less intend to deliver at this next week. So this is my dresser here, exactly, which is why I agreed to do it. No, really, okay. Because side note, if you ever fly on Air Baltic, they do run, fascinatingly enough, a non-stop flight 4 times a week from Dushanbe to Riga and back. Now, if you, for fun, during coffee break, ask yourselves, what is the bilateral relationship, what is the coefficient of business and interest between Tajikistan and Latvia, or more specifically Dushanbe and Riga? I can tell you on a coffee break what I think it is. All right, but it's fat, but I'm on it. So other than trying to get my ticket for that, I've been working on this thing. Yeah, and it's what I call the not so great game. I'm going to approach this not from the emotive standpoint. I can't win the he said, she said. What are you really doing here in our country? If no one's going to believe the data. So I've attempted to lay it out in a fashion that is understandable, at least to me and some of my colleagues. The idea that there's something in the security world going on, that the United States military in particular, but the United States is involved in a security standpoint, and you can't trust anybody from that environment to tell you the truth. In fact, was an underlying condition of the great game as the British practiced it in greater Central Asia, really Afghanistan, in the 1800s. But a better way to say it nowadays is that there is a critique of the non-national influences in military and security affairs in Central Asian countries. Okay, so that's how I choose to start off, is by removing the word great game. And it gets very quickly to this idea that in the post-Cold War world, for which we're here at this little conference for, there is there really is, not just in Central Asia, but all over the world, and certainly, towards where the epicenter of the Cold War was, that part of the world, an evolution in security identity. Now, security identity can be described as having to do with how groups, so nation states, tribes, criminal organizations, others, define themselves in internal relations, okay, and with outsiders in terms of security topics. That can be conflict, that can be anything in transnational crimes, other factors, other issues. I mean, even how much money a country that with no money wants to spend on its military budget. In nation states, which is what I'm going to deal with here, it is how a nation state defines itself in terms of its own military and security. And there's a great body of literature on military culture out there. And right here at University of Kansas, Dr. Adrian Lewis has his book American Way of War is a great study in that, and he's one of the leading, I think, authorities, certainly voices in the military cultural debate in the country. So there's lots of literature on that. What I chose to do was to develop a simplistic model. And again, remember, pretend you're in my very critical audience I'm going to be facing here at the end of the week. And so I'm trying to capture an idea and then convince you of it. Okay, the first is that we are talking post-Cold War. And usually, again, if we're Central Asia, traditional Central Asia, it has to do with a post-Soviet thinking, post-Soviet military, as well as for all of the rest of us, a Cold War NATO-based military are the two main features I'm going to be comparing and contrasting. So a good example of a post-Cold War Western Europe, new evolution of security identity, can be seen in the case of the Eurocorps. Now, how many people, we're going to make this interactive, how many people have ever heard of Eurocorps? Okay, yeah, a couple. All right, and the usual suspects, I might add. Okay, so yeah, Eurocorps. And it was interesting. I was a associate professor at the Marshall Center when the Eurocorps, started really becoming in force and founded. And I remember the absolutely vociferous debates about it. And then, I hadn't really heard about it in a long time, but preparing for this, I kind of rediscovered it. And the thing about Eurocorps is that it exists, okay, today. It is 7 countries, or it's 12 countries, 5 framework and 7 other ones, that have come together and have determined they're going to have a headquarters, they're going to have a patch to put on their uniform, they're going to flag, and they're going to designate soldiers from those countries to serve as Eurocorps members. What's interesting about it is they're all also double counted as NATO soldiers. So it's clearly an organization already under an umbrella of another. So why, would you ask, would they do it? Well, for that, you have to turn back to the history of the whole thing. I'm going to go over it very briefly because it's only sort of my baseline model. 1963, after much dialogue after World War II, Germans and French decided we really need to have better relations overall. We're going to have yet another World War, part of the endless hundreds of years that they had it. And they said one of the ways we can do it is share actual military headquarters and experience in a permanent way. And so from 1963, when they signed pacts declaring there was a Franco-German brigade, I've actually visited it back in the 1990s. It exists. And from that idea all the way up until 1992, there were all this idea that within NATO, or outside of NATO, I should say, you could have a relationship, military relationship, and define your security identity not purely as just another NATO member. So from that German-Franco cooperation grew this larger idea that there were countries that wanted to act in a military way, but not necessarily defining what they did as part of what NATO does. Okay, and as they finally in 1992 more formally established themselves, and then there are other benchmarks that go on, they finally have come up with this headquarters, this several thousand man organization. And today, if you go to Afghanistan, you might, and you're in the ISAF headquarters, the NATO-led ISAF headquarters, you might run into a German officer or a French officer or an Austrian officer, who's got a Eurocorps patch on. Okay. And if you didn't know it, and really understood this, you wouldn't understand you're talking to an officer representing an entire different security identity. Okay, but they're there. They've also were in the Balkans, in the stability force mission in Kosovo and the Kosovo force mission under the umbrella of NATO, separate from it. And why did they do this? So they could have this alternate identity and security affairs. The advantages of it are that they get to express it individually as countries, but it also brings in countries that would be outside the normal alliance. Austria is a good example, not part of NATO, part of Eurocorps. Okay, why is this important? Well, it gives us a baseline to study, how they could do it, so now I can understand how Central Asian countries react. And the first is that, Europe, for all of its all of the economic crisis it's going through and claims it's been for years and years, has discretionary funds to spend on its military. I mean, in real terms. Their spending is low, below 2 and 3%. I think we want it. The United States is always fighting for them to get it at, I think, 3%, and they're under that. But those are political decisions. Funds are there. It's certainly all the armies are well established and armed and whatnot. So it's discretionary spending that determines the nature of the force's participation. The other is interesting, is associative identity. I mean, all these countries were part of NATO, wanted something different, but guess what? Didn't want to be individual. I mean, you won't go to Afghanistan today and run into a soldier who's in a French uniform with only a French flag, okay? He'll have a French flag, but he'll also have either the ISAF flag, maybe he'll have the Zerocorps flag. Okay, he could be on the UN observer mission there. He could have a UN patch. But there's no such soldier there with just only the flag of their country. Okay? So that's what's interesting about it. The idea that as Eurocorps developed and found in the post-Corps era, the environment where it could create new identities, it emerged create a new identity but remains associative to NATO. I mean, they only do the missions that really NATO will let them. Okay, and the last part of that is that they're stability oriented. There are no imminent, immediate threats that would require conventional military fighting, in Europe. Okay, the decisions about developing a force, this idea of Eurocorps, for instance, is not driven by battle lines, from Vienna, down to the Balkans or something like that. It's traditional military threats. We can get on to counterterrorism and all this other stuff. But the point is as far as security identities, Europe is a stability-oriented country. So now we're going to look at Central Asia, the countries of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Okay, and they're just roughly outlined on this map. And what's overlaid on it, okay, and this probably, if I did it better, I would, I'd have one blank and then I'd push the button at the right time. Are all the variety of security associative organizations for which Central Asian countries belong. Okay, so we see already that there are many options on the table. Just hold that thought. And now I want to do this very quick country by country analysis. And this is going to be very quick in front of you. I mean, it's 20 minutes, not designed to do the whole thing, but you'll see where I'm going with this. So if I took Kazakhstan, and some of, by the way, the information is blank because this is part of the study that's ongoing. And I'm working with like Matt Stein, another KU graduate, on what the best factors are to validate these categories. So the first is in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, oil-rich country. If you track their military spending since independence, post-Cold War era, what you find is that at different times it's always been around 1%. Okay, but at different times it's just gone up and down slightly from that. Always from political decisions. So if a country has money and can spend it off political discretion, increase or decrease it off political decision making, it's a candidate to be considered discretionary spending. The biggest factor for Kazakhstan for me to declare it a discretionary country is the fact that last year they went from receiving foreign military grants, okay, in other words, free money, usually from the United States, to make their military equipment purchases and training purchases, to what we call foreign military sales, meaning they're using their own national money above and beyond or part of, depending on how you want to do the numbers, of the 1.1% of the GDP to buy their own equipment. And that has broken them from, for instance, having only Russian-made, former Soviet and now Russian-made and Russian-maintained equipment. They now have some stocks that come from other countries. And that links them back to those other countries for both sales, maintenance, and follow-on. So Kazakhstan's become a discretionary country in terms of being able to create an independent idea of its own security, coming out of course, the Soviet Union, part of the Red Army, the Soviet military model. The next is, and this is what you're going to see for all of them, and this is what's missing whenever I go to Central Asia and I get beaten up, is this idea of what are you doing, USA? What great secret things? And the answer is, well, before I get to that, let's talk about what everybody else is doing. I mean, and what this is a long list, and it's one of the things that I wish someone else did, but no one else did. So we're doing it in my organization. Is we're trying to go through the open source and find, and list every single military activity that's happened in Central Asia since independence. Okay, and you can see a long list of military exercises. You can see who sponsored them. You can see a long list of the security-related organizations for which Kazakhstan has been a member. Some of these, different Central Asian countries are a member, then they quit and they come back in there. And also U.S. specifically, I'm highlighting U.S. security assistance since I always have to answer that. But what you see is again this rich milieu with not a single entity dominating it, like we saw in the Eurocorps model. Okay, where I have Eurocorps, but it's way inside of NATO. Okay, it's the same soldiers, just count them differently. Inside of this milieu, where we have military activity in terms of training, what we find is that they participate sort of equally with very many different organizations. Everything from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which purposely excludes Western countries, to the Partnership for Peace, NATO-sponsored series of exercises, to a variety of bilateral exercises with everybody from the United States to India to China to Russia and a variety. So Kazakhstan is establishing not an associative identity, but actually one that's independent via its association with very many different organizations. And finally, I think it's stability-oriented. And Kazakhstan has a particular record. In fact, advocating on the first day of its independence a nuclear-free option and taking matters to get rid of nuclear weapons on its territory, all the way to the fact that there have not been significant conflict or security events in Kazakhstan in 20 years. Except for there was a bombing there. Actually, when I was there in May, and to this day, it's still a strange sort of event. Okay, Kyrgyzstan, non-discretionary. I haven't got the data down here yet on the slide, but the idea of its budget's always not had any money to make military security identity decisions. It's a state for which it must receive donors, or diktat from others that are working there. But you see the same characteristic of participates with a large variety of different countries and multilateral military organizations and exercise regimes. It is instability oriented, and I won't highlight all the events that have happened in Kyrgyzstan over time. Okay, so that's what drives their identity. Tajikistan, same thing, non-discretionary, no money. Probably 0.9%, I think, is what they say for GDP, but the numbers are so bad in Tajikistan it's hard to call those numbers. It's semi-independent. It participates in a large variety of these exercises, but clearly, unlike the other countries, it is the Russians with the 201st Motorized Rifle Division, but really the training bases, the long-term lease of the Russian bases that are down there, and the fact that they do agree with the Russians that there's always going to be this close working relationship regarding the border with Afghanistan and protection of that border, and a very long cultural history we can go into differently in a different time on that. So they are tied and not really under the umbrella of Russia, but they can't make significant security moves without dealing with that particular country separately than the other countries have. They are instability oriented. Many examples of conflict that the government can't control in Tajikistan. Turkmenistan, non-discretionary, discretionary. They got oil money, but they also don't have hardly. They bought a couple new ships, upgraded new ships for the Caspian, but they don't really care much about their land forces or the conflict for them. It saves everybody. Okay, and so I say non-discretionary because it is a very poor country when you take into consideration how the money flows. They belong they actually participate in a large number of international exercises and organizations, but not military ones, mostly counter-narcotics and other things. And of course, they are stability-oriented because the first thing that they did was declare themselves a neutral country. Interesting for those that don't know that. So Turkmenistan is in their constitution, permanent, it doesn't say neutral, it says permanently neutral country. So they are non-stability, they are stability-oriented, not instability-oriented. Okay. And I think Uzbekistan's the last one that was on there, has discretionary spending, again, belongs to a large variety of organizations that do military activities, not any one thing, provides them independent identity, and then at the end of that, they are instability oriented vis-a-vis IMU, but also a large variety of other conflict events. Okay, so what does this tell us? I mean, and is a couple things. One is that before people say, "Wow, what's your real intentions out there?" The answer is, well, before we start talking about that, we'll talk about what the individual countries want to be known as, and that's their security identity. And that it is discernible. You can study it. You don't just have to say, well, I think you're this or that. I mean, you can find factors if you do enough research and break those down. Security identity is discernible. It addresses a social need to relate externally regarding security affairs and reflect internally as an expression of society's military-state relationship, okay, and other stability factors. There are no single models or sets of variables related entirely to economic or entirely to security capacities, but there are these different models that exist, and therefore they can exist, they can be studyable. Okay, we don't have to just rely on the next knee-jerk reaction in an ICG report, for instance. Central Asia is important to U.S. and global security interests. Okay, therefore, understanding the factors of security identity of Central Asian militaries will make our engagement with them more effective. Okay, so that's sort of and I have my policy hat on now. Okay, that's the non-academic reason to pursue this, and that ultimately, I'd probably be recommending U.S. policy should be to continue to engage with Central Asia with these understandings, and we can get more into that in the Q&A if you want, but that's what I'll be saying. Okay, so thank you very much.